The march of the machine has been stopped. The eternal enemy of freedom is finally vanquished, but this victory came at a great cost. A toll paid not in flesh and blood, but in souls and sparks. Phyrexia was defeated, but the repercussions of the invasion rippled through the blind eternities. The multiverse had to heal itself from this devastation, and it did so the only way it knew how, by pruning the powers of those who had harmed it. Thus, it was dubbed the Great Pruning, and it would forever change the course of Magic the Gathering history. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ether Hub. I'm Sai, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. Today I want to cover an event stemming from the March of the Machine and its aftermath, one that will drive the direction of the MTG story to come. An event known as the Great Pruning. In this video, I will discuss what the Great Pruning is, who it impacted, and how it can affect the story moving forward. Before we start, I just want to say thank you all so much for waiting patiently for new videos. I took a bit of a break to deal with some personal stuff. Then I was recently offered to become an MTG ambassador with Wizards of the Coast's new content creator program. So I've been kind of mired in that whole new endeavor. You guys will start seeing the fruits of that partnership soon, with some sponsored content from Wizards, and hopefully you guys enjoy what we create. But moving forward, you guys will be seeing a lot more content and uploads from me than you've been getting in the past few months. So make sure to tick that notification bell if you want. If you enjoy our content here at the Ether Hub, please consider leaving this video a like, sharing it with friends, and becoming a subscriber. And now, let's get back to the lore. The Great Pruning is a mysterious event that happened at or near the end of the March of the Machine story. Though it's debatable why the Great Pruning occurred, its effects are quite obvious. Planeswalkers across the multiverse have seen their sparks fade from their being, rendering them planeswalkers no more, unable to travel through the blind eternities. Though the reason for the Great Pruning is not fully known, it's theorized that it could be the fabric of the multiverse trying to heal itself from the events of March of the Machine. It could be that Elspeth Tirel exploding the filigree Silex in the Blind Eternities had damaged it in some way, or perhaps the various wormholes created by Elish Norn's invasion tree tore at the structure of the multiverse. Either way, something during the Phyrexians' invasions triggered the Great Pruning to occur. Much like the Great Mending that happened many years ago, which saw the multiverse greatly reduce the powers of planeswalkers and attempt to heal itself from numerous calamities through time and reality, the Great Pruning saw the multiverse again taking powers away from planeswalkers. This leads us to believe that planeswalkers and their gifts are tied to the fabric of the multiverse. Perhaps this ability is granted by the multiverse itself, and is taken away as a means of reabsorbing that lost power. Either way, this mysterious relationship between planeswalkers and the multiverse is further explored with the Great Pruning. As you would expect, the Great Pruning affects a significant number of planeswalkers in the story. These are the currently known planeswalkers that have lost their sparks as a result of the Great Pruning and the war against Phyrexia. Calix. Calix losing his spark is probably one of the most consequential for the story. Not because Calix is a fan favorite or beloved character, but because his spark vanishing could mean something major will happen to another more substantial planeswalker. Let me explain. First, who is Calix? If you don't know, I don't blame you. He's a planeswalker introduced during the mire that was the story of Theros Beyond Death. That set didn't have an official written out story, with only blurbs and flavor text left to round out anything of story significance that happened, and there was plenty of story significance in Theros Beyond Death, namely the escape of Elspeth Tirel from the Plains Underworld, and as we know, she was pretty important in War of the Spark. Anyway, Calix was introduced here, brought into existence by the Theros god of fate and destiny, Clothes. Yes, Calix isn't a normal human. He was created by Clothes to pursue Elspeth Tirel and bring her back to the underworld, as that was her fate, one that Clothes felt the planeswalker had cheated. As this was Calix's only purpose, his own destiny shifted to help him pursue his target. As Calix and Elspeth fought, Calix would lose, but get better each time, adapting to Elspeth's attacks. When Calix discovered Elspeth was a planeswalker, he too willed a spark into existence solely so he could chase her across the multiverse and bring her back. That's his whole character. Now he has lost his spark thanks to the Great Pruning, but as his fate is so closely tied with Elspeth's, I don't think fate would leave him completely unable to pursue her. To me, this means that either Elspeth too has lost her spark, or that they will one day find each other via omen paths. It would be curious to see how Calix could change as a character if he could no longer pursue Elspeth, but more so, I think it would play off of his original design to find out that he shared a sparkless fate with Elspeth. Kiora, everyone's favorite big monster tamer and godly artifact thief, returns in March of the Machine Aftermath, now with something of hers taken, her spark. Yes, Kiora is now sparkless, being pruned of her planeswalking powers as a result of the Great Pruning. Many fans will remember this merfolk fondly as the gutsy, otherworldly leader of the merfolk of Theros. Kiora was so confident in herself that she even challenged the god of the seas, Thassa, and won. Not in combat, mind you, she got handled pretty hard, but Kiora did manage to swap the sea god's trident, a powerful artifact that could control the tides, not only on Theros, but in any ocean of any plane. She just snatched it and planeswalked out. In the story, Kiora had some mixed receptions. In Theros, she was regarded as an awesome addition to the planeswalking roster. That awesomeness faded a little when the Eldrazi were released on her home plane of Zendikar. Rather than standing with the newly formed Gatewatch to kill the Eldrazi, she went rogue and attacked them with gigantic sea monsters under her command. This, however, failed and she deemed the Eldrazi unstoppable. She even got into the Gatewatch's way and almost ruined their plan to end them once and for all. But it was all in an attempt to save Zendikar, so at least there was good intention there. Now, with the planes of the multiverse under siege by the Phyrexians, Kiora returns to Zendikar to defend it once again. It's here that her spark wanes, and forever she is planebound, stuck on a world that she will fiercely protect. Koth is a great hero of the multiverse, a proud defender for his home of Mirrodin before it was lost forever and became New Phyrexia. While others withdrew from the fight, giving up hope at stopping the perversion of their world, Koth stood defiant, his molten geomancy always burning away the impurities afflicting what used to be Mirrodin. While Koth's story had always involved the Phyrexians being born to the world that would give rise to New Phyrexia, Koth surprisingly didn't get much airtime in March of the Machine. He was always there, leading what was left of the Mirran resistance, standing as a symbol for the people who truly lost everything because of the Phyrexians. He was a great ally to those of the Gatewatch and was at the climactic battle that saw Elesh Norn fall, but outside of that, he isn't given much of the meat of the story. His fate is a unique one, as he is actually given a new home in March of the Machine Aftermath. New Phyrexia, what was his home of Mirrodin, has traded places in the multiverse with the phased realm of Zhalfir. Now Zhalfir is back in our primary reality, while Koth's home is irreversibly lost. Koth now resides on Zhalfir without a spark, trying to make a new home for his people. The Great Pruning came and ripped sparks from planeswalkers indiscriminately, and even the level-headed monk Narset wasn't spared this fate. Narset is a really fun character who I just love and would love to see further developed in the future. But those future stories will have to be based on Tarkir, Narset's home plane, because that's where she got stuck following the events of March of the Machine. Narset's story was one of awesome potential, being a monk of the Jeskai Order following her Dragon Lord Ojutai, her spark only igniting during the stories of the Tarkir block when she uncovered a great secret, that the dragon clans were not always in power, that the timeline had been changed at some point, that once mortal-led clans ruled Tarkir and drove dragons to extinction. This was forbidden knowledge, and the truth of it caused Narset's spark to ignite. It was great character design to have her be sparkless in one timeline and then gaining that spark after she learns of that previous timeline. I just loved it. She's kind of fallen off since her heyday, being featured again on Ikoria for that set story, but ending up not doing much of anything. More so, she was just spotted there and shared some words of wisdom, but nothing of substance. In the wake of the Phyrexian attacks across the multiverse, Narset returns home to Tarkir in order to defend it. Now she's stuck on Tarkir without a spark to continue her search for knowledge. She still wants to learn more of this previous timeline on Tarkir, and why the Dragon Lords look to keep it hidden. Now she has plenty of time to devote to this endeavor. Another native of Tarkir, the dragon-loving Sarkhan Vol, also finds himself now trapped upon his home after the Great Pruning. It was in fact Sarkhan Vol who was responsible for the diverging timelines of Tarkir discovered by Narset. He set in motion events that saw the rise of the Dragon Lords, after coming to despise the Tarkir ruled over by mortal Khans after they drove the dragons to extinction. On Tarkir, it's the Dragon Tempests that is responsible for creating the Legion of Dragons that would bring the Khans to heel. Originally, these stopped when Ugin, their progenitor, was killed on Tarkir by his brother Nicol Bolas. Sarkhan Vol was once a minion of Bolas's, being enthralled by the power of the dragon, but driven away by the tyrant's cruelty. He heard whispers from a dragon lost, a ghost, and followed them. It was of course Ugin guiding the Planeswalker to reverse this fate. In traveling through time and changing the course of history, the Dragon Lords now rule Tarkir, as Sarkhan always believed was right for his home. He, like Narset, returned to Tarkir to defend it against the Phyrexian threat, seeing countless of his beloved dragons succumb to the oil of this enemy. He then fought with the strength of a dragon's heart. With the Great Pruning, he too now finds himself sparkless, perhaps returning to his former clan, the Mardu, as one of its highest-ranking human members. Probably one of the most unique cases occurring as a result of the Great Pruning is the sad fate of Ob Nixilis. He's a strange character, being an old Planeswalker, that being one who's been around since before the Great Mending and Planeswalkers had their powers greatly reduced. Before that, Ob literally went from plane to plane waging one-man wars and conquering entire worlds. Ever since losing that power, he's been trying to find ways to again become a tyrant, which eventually saw him transformed into a half-demon, which he didn't mind because it made him even more powerful. After messing with heroes on Zendikar, almost drowning Gideon Jorah with his bare hands, and generally just causing problems, Ob Nixilis travels to the great city of New Capenna and becomes a mob boss. It may not be the same as tearing a world apart with his bare claws, but destabilizing criminal organizations by being an even nastier criminal enterprise does vie with Ob Nixilis quite well. As he was on the rise within New Capenna's nightlife, he ran afoul of Elspeth, who cut his ambitions short, literally by cutting him nearly in half. He planeswalked away from that encounter, but sometime after decided to return to New Capenna to rebuild his empire. He was there when Phyrexia attacked, but didn't engage with the monsters. He sat on the sidelines waiting to see who the ultimate victor was, so that he could, of course, side with them. The people of New Capenna prevailed. Ob Nixilis lost his spark, and now he has 5 angry mob families looking for him. And I promise you, they don't want to give him a fruit basket. Samut is a brave warrior from the plane of Amonkhet. Though her world was fundamentally altered by Nicol Bolas for his own purposes long before her birth, Samut rose to become more than anyone could ever believe. Amonkhet was meant to be nothing more than the breeding ground for Bolas's mindless fighting force. People spent their entire lives dedicated to learning how to fight, and fight well. Such was the life of Samut, though she had discovered a great and terrible truth, that the dragon they had worshipped as their god pharaoh actually perverted the purpose of the other gods for his own desires. Their lives were a lie. So, Samut dissented. With Bolas claiming his army from Amonkhet, most of the plane lies in ruin, with only one true god of the plane remaining, Hazoret, Samut's god. Samut had saved the god's life from certain death. Hazoret's appreciation was enough to cause Samut's spark to ignite. Now, as the sands of Amonkhet flood with Phyrexians, she again returns to fight side by side with her god and the other survivors. Without a spark, Samut remains on Amonkhet, destined to lead her people through a treacherous world and settling some new civilization. The Wanderer, whose true name is not known, is in fact the current ruler of Kamigawa, a plane where the physical and spiritual realms commingle. Though trained to be an excellent fighter and diplomat in preparations for her preordained role as emperor, the Wanderer was also a planeswalker whose spark would ignite in her youth after a would-be kidnapping attempt. However, her spark was never stable. She had little control over it, and it would often planeswalk her to a random world. She would later gain a bit more control over her power, just enough to meet with an old friend and fellow planeswalker, Kaido, saving him more than once during their time with the March of the Machine storyline. One of these rescues called her back to her home of Kamigawa, as Kaido was battling the now completed Tamiyo. The Wanderer would cut down Tamiyo and went on to defend Kamigawa from the continued invasion. Now with the Phyrexian invasion over, the Wanderer could take her rightful place on the throne, but has chosen instead to wander her plane for a bit, enjoying the freedom of being where she wants to be, when she wants to be there, without fear of her spark ruining the moment. She's been freed of her spark's instability, and is content letting Lightpaws rule as regent for a bit longer. Tyvar Kell is a relatively new planeswalker to the roster of Magic the Gathering, but he didn't get to enjoy that spotlight for very long. This boastful elf is a strong warrior of Kaldheim, who participated in the stories that took place on his home plane, and directly led to the story of March of the Machine. Plus, he really built up hatred for the planeswalker turned Phyrexian Tibalt, leading to their climactic confrontation and Tibalt's death. Tyvar Kell spent a lot of the March of the Machine story on Kaldheim, uniting the different realms that make up his plane into a singular fighting force against the invading Phyrexians. His voice bellowed over the battlefield, filling his allies with songs of triumph. But those songs quieted when the shadow of their god, a world-encompassing serpent, appeared in the sky coated in metal. It had been completed. Tyvar Kell, fearing no foe and fighting for his home and glory, jumped into the Great Serpent's maw and fell below the sea. Breaking the surface, he had somehow, against all odds, struck down their Phyrexianized god. From the inside out, no less. As the entirety of Kaldheim revels in their victory, the Great Pruning occurs, and now Tyvar Kell remains on his home to help rebuild, no longer a planeswalker. The troubled soul that is Nahiri is a story that seems to be getting worse and worse. Like Nahiri keeps being a worse and worse person despite my desperate plea for a redemption arc. I thought she was on one when she joined the team to attack New Phyrexia in an attempt to stop Elesh Norn and her invasions, even sacrificing herself so that the others could continue the mission. Nahiri was captured and completed, now a pawn of Elesh Norn, but that's not her fault, nor could she be blamed for her actions. As a Phyrexian, she led the attack on her home of Zendikar. As Phyrexians attacked the citizens below, Nahiri tried to corrupt the ancient Skyclave Hedrons that were once placed there to trap the Eldrazi. She hoped to open larger portals to New Phyrexia, ensuring her victory, but she was stopped after grafting herself to the stones by former allies, blasting her with pure concentrated Halo magic, the source that could expel the corruption of Phyrexian black oil. When Nahiri awoke in the wreckage, she was no longer a Phyrexian. The Halo had cured her. She had remorse for her role in Zendikar's damage and attempting to fix things. She searched in vain for her Planeswalker spark, feeling it missing and finding it trapped within a Hedron. She's then ambushed by Ajani, who was still a Planeswalker, trying to convince Nahiri to join him in healing the multiverse. Nahiri just loses it. She looks over the destruction of her plane and places the blame on planeswalkers and their meddling. She fights back against Ajani, who, in her paranoia, she believed was there to kill her. She ends up falling and shattering the Hedron that housed her spark, solidifying her status as a non-planeswalker stuck on Zendikar, and vowing to never let another planeswalker set foot on Zendikar again. On the newly materialized plane of Zhalfir, other planeswalkers were found trapped here much like Koth. Zhalfir had taken the place of New Phyrexia in the makeup of the multiverse, with the Dark World now inhabiting the phased-out place in space and time that Zhalfir once resided. Here, one of the greatest sons of Zhalfir is now permanently fixed, the Time Mage Teferi. Teferi is the one responsible for phasing Zhalfir out of time originally, hoping to keep his home safe from the first Phyrexian invasion. Now his story has come full circle, as his spark fades and he again joins his community on his new plane. Along with Teferi and Koth, two others would find themselves desparked on Zhalfir, the artificial golem Karn and the animist Nissa Ravane. Karn and Nissa's sparks were joined by fate. Karn was attempting to cure Nissa's soul of the infectious black oil that was used to complete her. Nissa and Ajani were captured once Elesh Norn was defeated, and great pains were made to remove the influence of the Phyrexians from their bodies. While the metal was removed, curing their souls would be another thing altogether. With the black oil covering their souls and sparks, Karn started a ritual that would remove their inner essence and wash them clean with his own spark. This naturally resulted in the loss of Karn's spark, rendering him no longer a planeswalker. While the ritual worked perfectly fine for Ajani's spark, meaning he kept his planeswalking abilities, there seemed to be some unstable reaction with Nissa's. It crumbled and faded off before it could be transplanted back within Nissa. Karn had no idea how this would affect Nissa, but when she woke up, they found that she too was no longer a planeswalker. Our final entry for planeswalkers who lost their sparks in the March of the Machine are the twins Will and Rowan Kenrith. Like other planeswalkers in this story, they were beckoned back to their home plane of Eldraine to help their parents defend the realm from the Phyrexian invasion. Their parents were none other than the ruling monarchs of the civil people of Eldraine, King and Queen of Ardenvale. As the twins have grown in the story, they found that their Planeswalker sparks are unique because they in fact only share a single spark between the two. As twins, they seem to share a lot, including a spark. They can only Planeswalk together, and it indicates that their souls are somehow intertwined. While helping to defend Castle Ardenvale from the Phyrexian attackers, King and Queen Kenrith would lose their lives. A sad day for the realms to be sure, but none more grieved solemnly than their children, who then rallied the peoples of Eldraine to push back the invaders until the day was ultimately won. As the portals in the sky faded, so too did the shared spark of Rowan and Will Kenrith. Now stuck on their home plane, the twins must navigate the political turmoil resulting from their parents' deaths, and the sticky, rightful line of succession. Will Kenrith believes he is next in line to rule, taking the crown for himself and claiming the throne. It will be this conflict that catapults the next chapter of Magic the Gathering story, starting with the Wilds of Eldraine. With the multiverse coming to terms with this new normal, and so many less planeswalkers about, the story will be taking a much more insular focus. That meaning we'll step away from large-scale end-of-days for the multiverse scenarios, and again focus on singular issues happening to the planes focused on a set. It's been a while since we focused on the current climate or events of a plane and not tying it back to some larger scheme cooking in the background. It's going to be nice to see a more in-depth focus on the peoples and cultures of planes, without the shadow of a Nicol Bolas or the Phyrexians constantly shading it. To me, that's a great new direction and one I'd happily trade a few sparks for. Still, we are in a sense mourning the loss of some of our favorite characters as we know them. March of the Machine may not have the body count we expected, but it did have a much larger impact than, say, the aftermath of War of the Spark. With March of the Machine, we at least see characters impacted in a real and substantial way. With some no longer able to planeswalk, we essentially cut down on the roster of possible characters we can see per story. A sort of narrative death, if you would. And that's where I'd like to end this video and kick it back to you guys. Who are you going to miss most from the pruned planeswalkers? Did your favorites make it out with their sparks intact? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching this video. If you liked it, consider supporting the channel by leaving it a like, sharing it with friends, and becoming a subscriber. It all goes a long way in helping us grow the channel. And until next time, guys, see ya!